really quick before we get started, thank you to everyone who left suggestions in the comments on how to improve this series along with all of my videos. Your suggestions are greatly appreciated, and with that, we also now have source control for this project. There's a link to that in the description, so be sure to check that out if you need that. Other than that, enjoy the video. Honestly, I wasn't really excited to do this video. I really want to add more domain logic and build some more services, things like that. But instead, we're going to be building the control for the MajorIndexViewModel. And I wasn't excited at first, but I did some planning, and I think we're going to be doing some pretty cool things in this video. I did some wireframing here. I know Visio isn't really the best tool you'd want to use for wireframing, but I was already here for my UML stuff, so I figured, why not? So this is the MajorIndex card. We're going to have a card that's going to display all of the information for each major index, and then we're also going to create a major index listing, which is just going to have a bunch of cards in it and have this little header. Let's go ahead and create this major index card. So I have our little wireframe sitting over here, and we're just going to be using that as our reference while we do this. So let's go into our controls and let's add a new user control, and we're just going to call this the major index card. Okay, so we have our user control. First things first, we see we have a border, so instead of having a grid, we're going to have a border, and we're going to give this a brush. I like to go with light gray because it's not too strong. It's like the perfect little touch of border. And then let's go ahead and give that a border thickness of 1 so that we can see it. And we have these rounded corners, so we're going to have a corner radius. We're going to go with 10 for now. Now inside this border, let's go ahead and create our grid. And this is just going to have all of this content. Now first, we want to have a little bit of a margin from the border. As you can see, we're a little bit far from the border on all sides, so we'll just go with 10 for now. And then inside this grid, we're going to have a couple of rows. So let's create these rows, and we're actually just going to have 2 rows. And you might be thinking, why 2? There's obviously 1, 2, 3, but I want to have 2 because I want to have 1 row for this header, and then I want to have another row that has all of this inside of it. So our first row is obviously going to have our little text block header here. So let's create a text block. It's going to go in row 0. You don't have to specify row 0 if it's the 0th row. That's what the row is by default, but I like to explicitly state it in case I move it around, then I remember to change the row. So let's give this a little bit of a font size. We're just going to go with 18 for now, and then we have to set the text to this, and it's going to be a binding. Now what the heck are we binding to? I actually forget what I named the property, so let's go in here. Our data context for this card is going to be a major index, which means we're going to have access to all of these properties. So for our header, we're actually just going to bind to this type, which is going to be one of these enum values. So let's go ahead and update that in our control. We'll say type. Now underneath this header, we're going to have another grid, and this grid is going to go in row 1, and this grid is going to have some rows and columns. So it's going to have 2 rows, and as you can see, we have these 2 rows over here, and then it's also going to have 2 columns. And for the width, I actually want these to be star because I want them to be equal widths. So now inside this grid, we're just going to have a bunch of text blocks. So our first text block is going to be first row and first column, and the text for that is just going to be this little label for price. And then we can actually just copy and paste this, and in the column next to this is where we're going to have the actual price. So we can have a binding to price. and that price is obviously this property on the major index. So I want this price to come up as a currency with a dollar sign and everything and be formatted with decimal places. And to do that, we can use a string format. And we can have a set of parentheses or brackets, and then another set, and inside here we can say 0:C. So it'll format this first value, the price, as a currency. So now I'm actually going to go ahead and copy all this, and we're going to paste it. Good old copy paste, and this is going to be for the changes, and we're going to bind that to changes. Again, going to be formatted as a currency, and instead of row 0, it's going to be in the second row. Now let's go ahead and test out this major index card, throw some data in there and see how it looks. So we're going to put this on our home view, and we're going to have to import the namespace where the major index card is located, and we will just call this namespace controls, and it'll be in simpletrader.wpf.controls. So now underneath this header, first we're going to have to create some row definitions here so that we can put it in a different row than the header. Okay, so underneath this header we're going to have our control, and as you can see the major index card pops up, and this is going to go in row 1 underneath the header, and we'll give it some margin as well. And the data context, what is that going to be? Well, we know the data context for our home view is the HomeView model, and the HomeView model has a MajorIndexViewModel, and then on our MajorIndexViewModel we have these major indexes. So this is what our data context is going to be, because the data context for a major index card needs to be a major index, and it just so happens we have one right here. So our binding again is going to be on the MajorIndexViewModel dot, so one of these, we're just going to choose Dow Jones. Okay. Now let's go ahead and run this. And let's put a breakpoint on Dow Jones real quick just to make sure that we get the data. And let's hit the home view. And we get Dow Jones. And let's continue. We know we have data, but it doesn't pop up. Where is the data? And before I talk about that, let's actually add some alignment to this, because as you can see, it's all stretched out. Let's go ahead and give this some horizontal alignment, left, and there we go. It's all the way to the left, but still we have no data. And why is this? Well, if we look at our major index view model, Dow Jones gets set, but the UI is not told that Dow Jones has a value now. And to do that, we're going to have to implement iNotifyPropertyChanged and raise a property changed event. So a lot of our view models are going to have to raise on property changed events. So what I'm actually going to do is go to our view model base, and this is going to inherit from observable object. And observable object is something that we created a few episodes ago, but it's just a plain object that implements iNotifyPropertyChanged and has a method to raise property changed events for a property. So now that we have this on our view model base, our major index view model should actually inherit from view model base, and now we can raise on property change. So it's going to take a little bit more work on our properties. So we're going to have a private field up here, just call it Dow Jones, and our getter is just going to return that. But then our setter is going to set Dow Jones to the value that gets passed through the setter, and then it's going to raise on property changed for the Dow Jones property. So that's a lot to type out, which is why I actually made a snippet for it. So check this out. I made a snippet called prop change, and it generates all this, and I can go through these values and it'll change everything automatically. So this is NASDAQ. See, it updates it all there, and then NASDAQ as the property name, and I press enter and it updates it down there. And this snippet is awesome. If you guys want this snippet, I'll probably put it in the description, have a little link to download it. So we can get rid of this property, and then we need another prop change for S&P 500. And we can remove this plain property down here. So now what's going to happen, put a breakpoint right here. If I run this, click home, see we had a plain card, but then Dow Jones gets set, and then we're going to raise on property change, let our UI know, hey, Dow Jones has a different value now. So let's press continue, and there we go. We get all the data that we want to display. But as you can see, this is kind of, well, it needs some work. We'll put it that way. So first thing I want to do actually is, let's get some margin on the top. So I think I want 0.10, so that's on the top and bottom. And okay, that's a little bit better. And then let's go ahead and center this header. That looks good. And then let's give all of these a margin of 5 so that there's some spacing between everything. And maybe that's all we need. Actually, I want to horizontal align these two right, because that's what we have over here. So horizontal alignment right. And there we go. So another thing is it puts parentheses around negative numbers for this string format for currency, and I'm actually okay with that. The negative number is kind of cool, but you can't go wrong with just the parentheses. So our card looks good, and now what I want to do is let's go back to our wireframes, and I want to make this little listing view. So let's actually X out of these wireframes. I kind of get the gist of this one, and I don't want to take up too much space with all that. So let's go ahead into our controls, and we're going to add a new user control, and this one's going to be called MajorIndex Listing. And this one's going to be very simple. So all it's going to be is we're going to have 2 rows. And then the first row is going to be that header. So that's just going to be a text block in the first row. And the font size, I think we're going to go with 18. And then the text is just going to be major indexes. And this actually shouldn't be grid 1, it should be grid 0. Now underneath this header is where we're going to have all those cards, and they're going to be in their own grid. So this is going to be a grid with 3 columns. And I want all 3 columns to be the same width, so we'll give them star. And this grid should be in row 1. And we want to give it a little bit of margin from the header, so we'll do 0 left right and 10 top bottom. Now inside here, we actually don't need to import our namespace with the card control because it's already imported as local, which is the same namespace that we're in right now. So we can go ahead and use that. We get our major index card, and let's see, what do we want? We want to first put this in the column, and we'll give it a little bit of margin. It's going to be some left and right margin, so 10 on the left and right, and then 0 top and bottom. And then we need to set the data context for the card to be a major index. So our data context for this major index listing control is going to be our MajorIndexViewModel. So we're going to already have all these properties here that we can bind to. So our first binding, we'll do NASDAQ, and then we can just copy and paste all these, and then we'll do Dow Jones, and last but not least, S&P 500, and let's update these columns. And there we go, our major index listing control is looking pretty good. So let's go to our home view, and instead of having this card here, we're going to have our major index listing, and we're not going to have the data context as a specific major index. We're going to have it as our major index view model. And then let's go ahead and test this out. Click home. And there we go, we get all of our data. Now, as you guys saw, when it was loading, it actually showed nothing. So what we can do is we can go into our card, and we can actually give some fallback values for all of these bindings. So basically, if the type is null, then we can give a fallback value of, we'll just call this the name, and then the price. The fallback value can be $0, and same with the changes. So now if we run this, and we click on home, while it's loading, it had all those fallback values filled in instead of empty data, and then our data loaded, and we got everything that we needed. And I actually think this major index listing would look better if it was horizontal aligned as the center. And that looks pretty good, actually. Now, another thing, we have this major index listing, and then the data context is the major index view model. I actually want to rename our major index view model to be the major index listing view model. I feel like that's a better name. So if we go over here, we can rename major index listing view model, and then it should prompt you with this. Just say yes. If it doesn't prompt you with that, make sure you also rename your class as well. And then go into our home view model, we can rename this to be major index listing view model. Same with this as well. And then we'll have to go into our home view, make this major index listing view model. So it's a lot of things with renaming a lot, because you have to make sure your bindings get renamed as well. Last thing I want to do for this episode is I want to automatically display the home view when the application starts. So what we can do in our main view model is we can create a constructor, and then we can use our navigator, call the update current view model command, and we can execute that with a view type of home. So when our application starts, we'll automatically be on the home view. And let's see this in action. So there we go, we're automatically on the home view, but as you can see, our radio button isn't selected. It doesn't say that we're on the home view. And to fix that, we're actually going to have to go into our navigation bar, and we're going to have to create a binding. So this binding is going to be on the isChecked property, and when do we want this radio button to be checked? Well, we want it to be checked when, let's go into our navigator, we want that radio button to be checked when the current view model equals a home view model. So the data context of this navigation bar is the navigator, so we have access to this property right in here. So we can say isChecked binding to the current view model. But like, what does that even mean? How can you bind isChecked to the current view model? Because the current view model isn't a Boolean value. So what we're going to have to do is convert the current view model to a Boolean that will tell the radio button to be checked or not. And to do that, we're going to have to use a converter. So let's create a new folder for converters. And inside here, we'll create a converter. We'll call this equal value to parameter converter. And this can be public, and it's going to implement iValueConverter, which is what all converters must implement. So let's import that namespace and implement the interface. And we get two methods here, convert and convert back. Now convert takes a value. What is our value? Our value is the current view model. And another thing we can do is we can pass in a parameter. And what do we want the parameter to be for isChecked? Well, we want that to be the type of a home view model. And you'll see why in a second, but to get that type, we're going to have to import a namespace. We'll call this VM for view models. And it'll just be a namespace that points to our view models. And the converter parameter is just going to be xType. It's going to be the type of the home view model. Let's actually move these onto different lines so we can see everything. So now, let's go to our converter, and what are we getting? We're getting the current view model, and we're getting a type. And the type is a home view model. So what we can do is we can return a Boolean here, and the Boolean is going to compare value to string, and it's going to check if it's equal to parameter to string. So the value to string, well, our value is the current view model on the navigator, and let's say that's a home view model. So if it's a home view model, that means when we call toString, the value is going to be simpletrader.wpf.viewModels.homeViewModel. Okay? So now parameter equals the type home view model, and when we call toString on that, it's going to equal the same thing. So that's how this converter is going to work. Now, to use this converter, we need to set it on the binding, and we're going to have to import it. So we will bring in that namespace converters, and then up here in our user control, we can add a resource, and we can have a resource to our new converter, and we can give it a key so we can use it. Okay, and now let's grab this key, and we can say the converter equals static resource, the key. Let's run this, and actually before we do that, I want to show you guys how these strings match up. So let's call this value string equals value dot toString, and then we'll call this p string, and that's going to be parameter toString. Let's put a breakpoint here and run the application. So we hit this breakpoint, our value equals a home view model. Okay? And then our parameter equals, it's the type of home view model. So if we run toString on our home view model, we get this simpletrader.wpf.viewModels.homeViewModel, and then if we run toString on this type, we get the same thing, so it's going to return true. And there we go, our home radio button is checked. But let's say we click on portfolio, we actually get an exception because we don't have anything in this convert back, and it just throws this exception. And that's okay, we actually don't want anything on convert back because we never want to convert from a Boolean to a view model. So to fix that, we're going to set this binding as one way. So whenever we check the radio button, or whenever it gets set to false or anything, it's not going to send anything back to this current view model binding, because that's not what we want. It doesn't make any sense. So let's go ahead and just add this to our other radio button down here. So is checked. Use the same converter, and all we have to do is change this to be portfolio view model. And then we can't actually do anything with these other radio buttons because we don't have view models for them just yet, but this should be good. But anyways, that is going to wrap it up for this episode. So we created our major index card, we created our major index listing, which has all of our cards inside of it, and then we went ahead and displayed that on the home view. And then we also set our application to display the home view on startup. Thank you guys so much for supporting this series. I hope you're learning more and more with every episode. If you have any questions, criticisms, concerns, be sure to leave them in the comments. Other than that, thank you for watching. Be sure to leave a like or subscribe for more. Thank you.